Hello and welcome back for another one of our lessons together. My name is Dr. James Johnson, and I am in charge of the spiritual care department at Honey Lake Clinic. It's one of my great joys to get to teach these classes because I really feel like they help us to have a appropriate worldview and to understand life, the universe, and the human experience as God has created it to be, to help us to live in harmony and not to live in unhealthy fear. And that's why we're going to teach a class today on a pretty unlikely subject for a behavioral health clinic, and that's the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation. The reason why I wanted to make sure we covered this material is not only because it is an important part of the biblical narrative and the overarching love story that God has with his creation, of how God wants everybody to come back home to his family, but it's also a source of contention within the Christian faith all over the world as to how people have interpreted this portion of the Bible and attempted to apply it, and as a result, in our postmodern American culture, this has created such a source of unhealthy fear. And we need to go ahead and just find the balance on that from the very beginning, that there is such a thing as healthy fear. God has given us the emotion of fear to allow us to protect ourselves. Fear lets us know we might lose something. And in a healthy space in our life, fear protects us. If I am working on the roof of my house to put up Christmas decorations, then a healthy fear causes me to protect myself, to anchor myself to positions, to not do things carelessly. Why? Because I might fall off the roof and hurt myself or die. When I do woodworking, I've fallen in love with working with wood over the past years, and my father is very big into that. And one of the things that I have learned is to have a healthy fear of the table saw. If I don't have a healthy fear of the table saw, I can very easily injure myself very badly. And I don't want to do that. I want to enjoy what the table saw provides as a tool without injuring myself or other people in the process. That is a healthy fear. Unhealthy fear cripples us. Unhealthy fear causes us to live in constant anxiety, overwhelming panic, and in a state of disorder that is not healthy. And so, as we look at the book of Revelation, we have to recognize that it was never intended to inspire unhealthy fear. It was always intended to cause us to live with a healthy anticipation of God putting all things right in his creation. And so as we look at this, I want to make sure we understand some background. The first background we have to understand is that people are naturally drawn to scary things. I mean, think about the multi-billion-dollar industry that fear has created, whether that is scary movies, horror films. People love those things. They pay tons of money to go to the movie theater or to sit in their homes at night, and they turn the lights down low and they watch a scary movie. And when I talk to people who love good scary movies, they often tell me that it's the knowledge that it's not real, that they can allow themselves to get scared and then remind themselves, this is a movie. It's all pretend. Or people who love roller coasters or bungee jumping or skydiving, that they can experience the thrill of the fear with the parachute, with the safety net, with the connecting bungee cord, with the anchor of the roller coaster track. Like, all of these things give them balance. But as a result, this fear has created a drive towards unhealthy fear, even within the church. And one of the things that began to happen in the Middle Ages and into the period of the Great Awakening was a sense of fear and existential dread that permeated the Christian faith. People like Jonathan Edwards preaching the famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, that this idea of fear that draws us to God, that not out of fear of, oh, the life is hard, God, I want to come to you for security. It's the fear that God is the source of the punishment, that God is wrathful, God is vengeful, and in order to appease this angry God, I must follow his rules and offer penance in order for him to love me again. And this is such a conflicted and broken view of God. One of the great problems of the Christian faith is this idea that the God of the Old Testament is different from the God of the New Testament. That the God of the Old Testament was vengeful and wrathful and loved to punish people for stepping out of line, for disobeying his commands. But then the God of the New Testament, Jesus, comes on the scene, and Jesus is loving, and Jesus is kind, and Jesus is meek and mild, and Jesus just accepts everything and approves of everything in order to love people. Well, neither of those views of God is accurate. That Jesus is God, and the God of the Old Testament is the same God as the New Testament, because God doesn't change. And as a result of this unhealthy understanding of who God is, we have permeated fear into the culture of Christianity. And as a person who came to the faith through fear, I am particularly sensitive to this because I recognize the danger and the harm that this has caused in people's lives. 70+% of Christians, depending on which study you look at, it's either 70 to 73%, multiple studies have been done on this, show that 70+% of Christians, of practicing Christians, view God negatively. And I blame this unhealthy fear culture we've created in the faith on that. That I remember as a young teenager, our church community, our youth group would do something called a judgment house. And it was like a Christian haunted house every Halloween that we would take over one of our local high schools, and they would give us permission to turn it into a Christian haunted house where you would go through this scenario situation of two people, two teenagers, one that was a Christian and one that wasn't. And they would die in a car wreck on a Friday night, and one would go to hell, and you would see all of the fear and the scariness of hell. And why didn't they just listen when the gospel was presented to them? Why didn't they give their life to Jesus? And then this other teenager who was living the Christian life, they go to heaven, and you see this throne room scene of God's judgment, and one gets ushered into eternal wrath and one gets ushered into eternal life, and it's this scare tactic. Now, once again, we can take this out of context to an extreme. On the one hand is the extreme of God's vengefulness and his wrath. But the other end of the extreme is God's love and his acceptance. That people like Rob Bell have created this heretical idea that God just loves everyone and that God will be universally accepting of every person, that God's love ultimately wins and universalism is actually the right path to choose, that God just ultimately loves everyone, accepts everyone regardless of your past and your decisions. And that's not true either. The balance is that God is a God of love and a God of liberty. And God gives people opportunity to choose if they want to accept his offer of love and relationship. If they accept it, they are in relationship with him. If they reject it, they are not in relationship with him. And those decisions do have eternal consequences. So how do we bring this back to balance? And I know that's a big preamble, but I want to help you understand that the goal of the book of Revelation, when the Apostle John was given this direction by God to proclaim this message, this prophecy that we're going to look at, it was never meant to inspire unhealthy fear. It was meant to inspire a healthy fear and to help them prepare for real events that they were going to experience in the future. And we're going to talk more about that, but I want to put this in the right place because one more thing I have to cover before we actually move into this actual text is in the late 90s, early 2000s, a couple of ministers who I believe meant well. I've never met them personally, so I don't want to insult them. I don't want to belittle them, but I do want to bring accuracy to this. Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye wrote a series of fictional books called the Left Behind series. And they gave into and fell prey to a inappropriate heretical teaching called the pre-tribulation rapture. And John Darby in the late 1800s came to this understanding as he read the Bible that he believed there would be two raptures. A rapture is just to be caught. The word rapture means to be caught up in. And so he was talking about this idea of a rapture where God will collect his family, all of the family of believers, his church will be taken up into heaven, and then there would be a period of tribulation on the earth with a single world government and an antichrist who would rise up to lead it. And since the church had been removed, it would show the world as this great disappearance would happen. And all faithful Christians would be caught up into heaven to be spared the tribulation that is talked about in the New Testament, that the church that would be brought about as an attack against the faith. And this pre-tribulation rapture that John Darby came up with is not in the Bible. There is a rapture that is talked about, and we're going to discuss that. But this idea of a pre-tribulational rapture where people could get left behind is not in the Bible. You have to twist Scripture to make it fit that belief. And John Darby, intentionally or unintentionally, we'll never know in this world, but it has caught the church by the coattails and has caused people to live in fear. There's actually a song from the 1960s called Left Behind. You'll wake up and find yourself left behind. And this fear culture has permeated Christianity, and we don't want to fall prey to that. We want to live in healthy fear. The emotion of fear is meant to inspire us and motivate us to action. I'll give you one example, and then we'll finally move into the actual topic a little bit more. That when our children were little, specifically our youngest daughter, she is just a lover of life. She has this beautiful imagination, and she tends to get distracted. And as a young child, she was so excited to cross the street that she was not mature enough to understand the dangers of crossing the road. And as good parents, we wanted to teach her, or trying to be good parents, we wanted to teach her how to have that healthy fear of crossing the street, that you have to look both ways and you hold hands. But she went to run out into traffic. As a young, immature child, she didn't understand what was going on. And in my fear of her being hurt or even dying, I grabbed her hand and I pulled her back close to me. And it even bruised her wrist a little, and she cried. Now, did I want to harm our child? Absolutely not. Did I want to keep her safe? Yes. That healthy fear caused me to recognize what could happen to her if she ran out into traffic, and I kept her safe because of that healthy fear. That is the goal that the book of Revelation is meant to inspire in the church, that the Christians who read this would have a healthy fear of what to expect in the future. So with that context, that preamble, let's look into it. And this is our big truth for this lesson, that if you forget everything else that we talk about, if you disagree with everything else I have to say as I teach through this, then that's okay. At least we can agree on this, that we may not know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future. That as I talk about this topic, and like I said, this isn't a very odd topic to teach at a behavioral health clinic, but one of the things that I want you to wrap your brain around is that this is important, that if we want to have a healthy mindset, if we want to live in health, we need to understand that God has created a purpose behind every part of Scripture. And when we read this appropriately in its appropriate context, we can recognize that while we don't know what's going to happen in the future, we do know that God is in charge of it. God is on his throne. Nothing is catching him by surprise. And while we do not know what the future holds, we do know who holds the future. God is in control. And now, I personally love all of this stuff. I have been studying the book of Revelation for over 5 years now in depth. I've written a commentary that's in its editing, pre-publishing phase. I'm really excited. I keep hoping that we'll get to it, but it's taking time, and that's okay. But I've spent years falling in love with this text. And what has broken my heart about it is people have misunderstood it because they don't know how to read it. You see, the book of Revelation is not really, that's actually not its title. The appropriate title for this book is actually the Apocalypse of St. John. An apocalypse is not a world-ending thing, and we use that in a modern language context. In the modern English language, an apocalypse refers to something that destroys the planet, that ends the world. But that's not what an apocalypse is. The word apocalypse comes from the Greek word apokalypsis, which means an uncovering, a revealing. It's literally a revelation, that something is being revealed to the writer to share with the reader. And that's what's supposed to happen, that God is revealing to John what is going to happen so that the church can prepare for it. So an apocalypse is not something to be feared. It's actually something to be celebrated. God has revealed something supernaturally to John and to other writers of apocalypses in the past to let them know this is what's going to happen so you can get ready for it. I mean, think about it this way. One of the joys of our current technological culture is that we have GPSs now. I remember remember the old days where we used to be, like pirates sailing the seven seas. We would have a MapQuest print off, and we would have our directions. Or before that, we would just have to use the Rand McNally maps and things like that to try to find our way from town to town, location to location. Now we have GPSs that are so connected to the internet and satellites, they can actually give us real-time updates of traffic patterns and of accidents, construction, hazards on the roads, and they adjust our routes. Just maybe a couple of months ago, I was traveling for the Army, and I was using my GPS, and the GPS rerouted me in the middle of my trip to give me a route around some construction that had started up and had slowed traffic down. It rerouted me. It revealed to me that there was construction, and it gave me a different path. There was a problem up ahead, and it gave me a way to avoid it. That's what an apocalypse does. It reveals something that's going to happen, a future situation, so the church can either avoid it or at least prepare for it. And that's what an apocalypse is. It is a genre of literature. And it has rules to follow, just like any other genre of literature. I mean, think about some of the other genres that you know of. Like, for example, a fictional story. Fiction is a genre of literature. Fiction is made up. And when I read fiction, like I love the Sherlock Holmes stories. They're fiction. Sherlock Holmes is not a real person. Dr. John Watson is a made-up person as well. Their adventures are all fiction. They're all made up, and it can be fantastical. It can be, it can make your imagination run wild. Or science fiction, something that happens way in the future and in far out space, or something like that, like the Star Wars or Star Trek movies and books. That's science fiction. It's made up. But then there's nonfiction. Nonfiction is actual history. It is things that actually really happened. Biographies tell stories about people's lives. Romance novels, textbooks, websites, newspapers, journals, all of these are styles and genres of literature, and each one of them has a set of rules you have to follow to read it appropriately. I mean, let's imagine this. What if I were to find a newspaper and it begins to tell me about a massive hurricane, category 4, that's about to hit my hometown that I live in, the town I live in. And so what do? I tell my wife about it. So this massive hurricane I read about in the newspaper is about to happen. We need to prepare for it. So let's we have to take days off work. We have to go to the hardware store. We have to buy all this lumber to board up our windows, and get all these cases of water to get our generator fueled up with all the fuel that we need, and we need to buy toilet paper and all this stuff to prepare. And then we're sitting there, and the storm doesn't come when the weather predicted it would. And my wife looks at the newspaper and she says, "You dummy, this newspaper was written 7 years ago. What's wrong with you?" You see, a newspaper has a set of rules that you have to follow when you read it, and one of the greatest rules is looking at when it was written. If I'm going to read the weather forecast in the newspaper, I need to say, when was this newspaper written? Was it written for me, or was it written to me? And those are two different things. So as we look at the genre of an apocalypse, we need to understand what it is, and we also need to understand its purpose. What's the purpose of an apocalypse? The purpose of an apocalypse is to let the reader know that something terrible is going to happen, and that God is going to work through that terrible event or events to accomplish his purposes on the earth for his people. That's the goal. And so when we read an apocalypse, we don't have to give in to fear. We can have a healthy fear, to prepare and to plan, and to understand that even though things are going to happen here on this planet, God is ultimately in control, and he's working through it to accomplish his purposes. So how do you and I read an apocalypse? Well, if a newspaper has a set of rules, and a nonfiction novel has a set of rules, and a website has a set of rules, an apocalypse has a set of rules. And to understand an apocalypse appropriately, we have to follow the rules. And that's where the vast majority of people, good teachers, educated teachers, college professors, have missed this because they're not following the rules. That they don't know how to follow, or they choose not to follow the rules for an apocalypse. So an apocalypse is a type of literature. Apocalyptic literature uses fantastic imagery to symbolize earthly realities. And in order to understand the text, we as the reader must be able to identify what each symbol is and what that symbol is referring back to. As you read through, and we don't have time in this lesson, we're just going to cover the broad strokes to take away the fear, the unhealthy fear that this book has created within the Christian community and the world. But what I want you to understand as you read it, you cannot understand the book of Revelation without understanding the Old Testament symbols it's pointing back to. And I'll show you some of that as we go through. But 90+% of the symbols that are in this apocalypse point back to the Old Testament, because John's readers would have understood the Old Testament. And guys, we do this all the time. We use figurative language and we use symbolism in everyday living all the time. And so we have to follow the rules. Now, where most people get hung up with the book of Revelation is they do not follow the rules consistently, or they don't follow them at all. And so we have to recognize that everything in this is a fantastic image that symbolizes an earthly reality. That you can't switch back and forth from figurative to literal and literal to figurative whenever you want to. It's always going to be figurative language. It's always going to be a fantastic image that symbolizes an earthly reality. When we see, like, one of the things that happens in the book of Revelation is a third of the stars are thrown down from the heavens onto the earth. Well, what would happen to the planet of Earth if a third of all the stars in the universe, not just the whole macrocosm, just the Milky Way galaxy, what if a third of the stars hit the planet Earth? What would happen? It would destroy the whole planet. And so we know, using common sense, that it's impossible for a third of the stars to literally hit the planet and it survive. So it's not meant to be taken literally. It's figurative. And that's what we have to look at as we read this. This is symbolic language. Apocalyptic language uses fantastic imagery to symbolize earthly realities. And so the good news is there are numerous apocalyptic passages in the Bible. Now, if you read the Apocrypha, there are numerous other apocalypses. The apocalypse of Peter, the apocalypse of Enoch. I mean, there are numerous apocalypses and apocalyptic passages in the Bible and in the Apocrypha, because an apocalypse was a common genre of literature to the ancient Jewish people. And it's not as common now, but I mean, you have to put yourself in the sandals of the reader. The Bible was written for us. It was not written to us. The Bible was written by specific people, inspired by the Holy Spirit to write specific things to specific people in specific languages and specific cultures and specific situations. And we can apply those things to our life today, but the Bible was not written to James Johnson in the year 2024 in the United States of America in modern English. It just was not. It was written to specific people. When Paul, the Apostle Paul, writes a letter to the church of Philippi, we call that the book of Philippians, he's writing to a specific group of people in a specific place at a specific point in time in a specific language in a specific culture in a specific context. And we have to understand those things to say, how do I apply the Bible appropriately? Otherwise, if I'm not careful, I can twist the Bible to fit my beliefs rather than twisting my beliefs to fit the Bible. So as we recognize, apocalyptic literature is scattered throughout the Bible, not just in this one book. And we see numerous passages of this. When the prophet of Ezekiel sees a valley of dry bones coming back to life. Well, that's not meant to be taken literally. It's not going to be a bunch of zombies walking around. It's a fantastic image of how God's going to take these spiritually dead people and give them new life again in Him. It's an apocalypse. It's apocalyptic literature, apocalyptic phraseology. And so you have to be willing to see that, and if you know what you're looking for, you can find it. But until you actually know it, you're going to get confused. And I was confused for a long time until I began to recognize these rules. So one of the rules of an apocalypse is symbolism. Now, symbolism is a literary tool, a literary device, and I was an English teacher for 17 years before God transitioned me into full-time clinical ministry, and I love the language of English. There are some crazy rules, there's some crazy things that we do, but there's a lot of beautiful things we do too to convey our meanings. I heard a teacher say one time that he disagreed with the phrase that a picture is worth 1,000 words. He disagreed. He said, I think a thousand words, right? He said a picture's worth 1,000 words. I think a word is worth 1,000 pictures. That's how he said it, because it's the beauty of the English language and how we can communicate. And language is beautiful, not just the English language, but in numerous languages that we use this tool of symbolism as a type of figurative language. It's not meant to be taken literally. It's a representation of something the reader would connect with. I mean, let's think about symbols. We use symbols all the time. These symbols are not the real thing. They represent the real thing. And some of these are all copyrighted images, so I'm not making money off of these images. So I'm not doing a copyright infringement. You know what these symbols represent. The golden arches, the golden M, that's the worldwide famous symbol of McDonald's, the fast food chain restaurants. Right? You can go anywhere in the world, and regardless of what language you speak, if you see that golden M, everybody knows it's food, it's McDonald's. What about this mermaid in the green circle? For a long time I didn't know this was a mermaid, but this is Starbucks. Right? Starbucks is named after the name of the ship in the book Moby Dick. And so Starbucks is a coffee shop, and we know that. What about the Pepsi symbol? You see that circle of red, white, and blue? That's the image for the Pepsi-Cola company. Or the check, the swoosh from the Nike company, or the symbolized, stylized peace sign of Mercedes-Benz. Now, these are all symbols, and I don't have to tell you what they are. You look at the symbol, and you know what it means, that you know that this is not the real thing. It's reflecting back to that thing. That the swoosh is not the Nike company, it symbolizes it. The golden M is not the McDonald's restaurant chain, it symbolizes it. And so we use symbols all the time. Now, symbolism is a reference to something in reality that what is being described depicts. And we do this all the time when we use figurative language. It's not meant to be taken literally. Here's one of my favorite examples. It's raining cats and dogs outside. When I was in high school, one of my friends was a German foreign exchange student that lived in America for a couple of years. And his name was Ernst, and I'm sure it still is Ernst. Ernst went back to Germany. I haven't talked to him in a long, long time. But when we were in school together, he had a very good grasp of the English language, but he was not familiar with Southern culture. And as he left Germany and came to America as a foreign exchange student, it was raining really bad one day, and I came in the building dripping wet, and I said, man, it's raining cats and dogs outside. And my friend Ernst dropped his bags, his books all over the floor, and ran to the window to see cats and dogs falling from the sky and landing on the ground. Now, is that what I meant when I said it's raining cats and dogs outside? That cats and dogs are literally falling from the sky and landing on the ground? No, it's figurative. It's symbolic. It represents something else. I'm talking about how bad it's raining. The phrase is meant to be a dramatic connection to the reality of the rain. And so you and I know that, but because Ernst did not, he misunderstood what I was saying. And so you and I have to be able to decode the symbols. So let's look at an example. In Revelation chapter 5, verse 6, we read this. Then I, and this is the Apostle John, this is the vision he's seeing. Then I saw, standing in the middle of the throne and the four living creatures, in the middle of the elders, a lamb that appeared to have been killed. So he sees a lamb. And it looks like it's been slain. It's been killed by, it's been put to death. The lamb, he had 7 horns and 7 eyes. Now, that's really weird. Lambs have 2 horns and 2 eyes. But he goes on to say that these are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. Now, we can look at this, and just in this whole thing, we can recognize that it tells us the answers. The 7 spirits of God, or the 7-fold Spirit of God, which is sent out to all the earth. Now, we can recognize in this passage there are 2 symbols we have to identify. We have to recognize the lamb that looked like it had been killed. What's that a reference to? Well, if you are literate in the Bible and you've been in church for a while, you've heard that one of the names for Jesus is the Lamb that was slain. John the Baptizer referred to Jesus when he saw him as the Lamb of God who took away the sin of the world, that a lamb, a pure, spotless, unblemished lamb, had to be sacrificed on the Day of Atonement for the nation's sins and each individual family's sins every year. That the father would take the lamb to the temple or purchase one at the temple, and it would be sacrificed, put to death as a atonement for the family. And so that is one symbol. And then says it has 7 horns and 7 eyes. Well, we know that that's figurative because lambs don't really have 7 horns and 7 eyes. And this is why we also need to understand that in Jewish culture, numbers have meaning. And as you read through the Bible, you'll see certain numbers pop up, and we have to be careful never to go to an extreme with anything, because the law of extremes tells us that anything, no matter how good it is in itself, when taken to an extreme, becomes dangerous. And this is true of numerology, or in Judaism is called gematria. And it's this idea that numbers have meanings. And on the one hand, we can say, on one extreme, every number that we see has some type of meaning, and we can become superstitious and let our obsessive compulsive tendencies take over, and every single number has to have a meaning. Or we can go to the other end of the spectrum and say, well, numbers just happen to be there. They don't have any meaning at all. We don't want to get superstitious. We're going to ignore it all. Well, no. Numbers often have important meanings. In the Jewish culture, the number 7 refers to the idea of fullness, of 100%. To the max. So if I were to talk about the 7-part spirit or the 7-fold spirit of God, it means it's the fullness of God. That God's Spirit is full of God's presence. That when I see the Holy Spirit referenced, it is all of God. That just as Jesus was able to tell the Apostle Philip, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. Jesus is 100% God. And so we recognize the same thing about the Holy Spirit, that 7 is the number of fullness. And so when we see that he has 7 horns, horns symbolize authority. And so he's his fullness of authority. He has 7 eyes. Eyes represent the ability to see something, to know what's going on. And saying that Jesus has 7 eyes means he sees everything in its fullness for what it really is. And so as the reader, we have to be cautious to look for the meaning while not going to extremes to force a meaning on them, but to see what they're showing us. So, as we've got some of these tools under our belt, let's begin to talk about the book. The book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse of St. John. It's called the Apocalypse of John because John is the writer. But there are many Johns out there. There's different Johns out there. There's John the Apostle, John the Beloved, right? Jesus' best friend. But there are other Johns that have been hypothesized. There's John the Elder, which is, some scholars believe that John the Apostle was killed at the island of Patmos, and he lived out his life there. And there's another John who was a leader of the early church, who lived a long life, lived over 100 years, and he ran a school where he taught people the Bible. That's John the Elder. Well, we have very little historical evidence for this John the Elder person that people have come up with. And there's also another John called John of Patmos, that they say that John the Beloved never went to the island of Patmos as a prisoner. This is a totally different John who lived on the island of Patmos as a prisoner and had this revelation. But the vast majority of scholars pretty much universally agree, and the early church fathers agreed as well, that this is the Apostle John. And we know this because of the internal evidence. We do know, based off of the church fathers and church historians, that the Apostle John was imprisoned by Caesar Nero for refusing to stop preaching the gospel of Jesus and running these churches. Because remember, for the first 300 years of Christianity was illegal. You were not allowed to, legally to be a Christian, and people broke the law by being Christians, which is why they could be imprisoned, tortured, and killed for their faith. And so we also recognize that in this book we see that this John who writes this book, is the bishop. He's the overseer of 7 church communities that are actual specific church communities. While yes, 7 is the number of fullness, and so we can apply these truths to the universal church. But if you read the book of Revelation, you see in the very beginning there are 7 specific letters that God tells John to write, and has the bishop over these churches. Now, he's not the pastor of these churches. They have their own individual pastor, but he is their bishop, their overseer, to ensure that they are teaching good doctrine, appropriate theological concepts, that he oversees this church communities. And so these are real people in real places, and John the beloved, John the apostle, was their bishop, was their overseer. So we can go with pretty strong confidence that the writer of this apocalypse, the apocalypse of St. John, is John the apostle. When and where was it written? This is another source of contention and disagreement. That some people for a long time, many scholars have said it had to be written in the late 90s, and now we have more evidence that it was probably written sooner. One of the greatest pieces of evidence, I believe, as a student, a theologian, and a scholar of the Bible and Christianity and church history, is that no book in the New Testament discusses the destruction of Israel as if it has already happened. In Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus gives what is called the Olivet Discourse, and he explains to the disciples what they would see in the near future, that they would hear of wars and rumors of wars, and that they would see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. And he warned them ahead of time that there would be a siege of Jerusalem, and when they're marveling over the temple complex right before then, Jesus tells them that one day there won't be one stone of this temple on top of another. And that prophecy of Jesus was fulfilled in AD 70 after the first Jewish revolt. And the future emperor general at the time, General Titus, leads the Roman military into Jerusalem and destroys it. He has a siege from April to August of 70 AD. And in August of 70 AD, they break through the gates and they destroy the city of Jerusalem. If Jesus predicted that and told the disciples they would see that, why in the world does not a single writing in the New Testament reference that? I believe because all of the books were written before 70 AD. Every single piece of New Testament literature, I believe, was written before 70 AD. And so it makes sense that we know that John was exiled by Caesar Nero, and that he was on this island when he was condemned to work in the rock quarry, and he received his revelation at that point. And so while scholars disagree and we can't know for certainty, I believe the evidence points to an earlier dating for this text. What does the book actually tell us? Well, the book follows what's called a chiastic structure. Chiasm is a type of literary design that follows a pattern of unfolding and then reversing, of mirroring. And we see that there's a prologue, letters to 7 churches, 7 seals of a scroll that are opened, 7 trumpets that are blown, Jesus defeats Satan, and then the reverse begins to happen. 7 bowl judgments, the millennial reign, a new Jerusalem, and the epilogue. And we see how in the beginning, the first half is all about the nation of Israel. The second half is all about the judgment on Rome and the restoration of all things at the end of time. And it follows this chiastic structure. Now, we don't have time to read the entire book together. As a key, if you love this and you want more details, if you like podcasts, I have a podcast called the Restoration Living Podcast, where I have spent the last year teaching through the book of Revelation. And so far, we're right now, as of this recording, we're at the 38th hour-long episode on the book of Revelation, and we're in Revelation 21 out of 22 chapters, so we're almost at the end. But if you want to go deeper into this and you want to hear, you can go ahead and check out the podcast Restoration Living and follow along with us. But this is going to be just a brief overview. Like I said, the goal of this lesson is not to teach the whole book, it's to take the fear out of it. So when people interpret the book of Revelation, there are 4 main views that people take, and there's a whole bunch of various ones that are really far out there. They don't hold a whole lot of water, but these are the 4 main ones that people use when they interpret the book of Revelation. The first is the historicist view. And the historicist view causes the reader to shoehorn the events of the book of Revelation into their current situation. I was listening to a pastor try to do this past Sunday, and I could only listen to a few minutes of it before I had to turn it off, but I was trying to follow along with him, and he was talking about how the seven seals that are opening are talking about the current United States government and how we need to get ready for a tribulation that is going to happen with pestilence and plague and famine. He was taking the historicist interpretation. He was making what happened in this book that was written almost 2,000 years ago apply in our modern context. And historicist interpreters have been trying to do this for thousands of years, for almost 2,000 years. They've been trying to say, who is this in right now in our life? And it makes you have to put it in your current context. The second view is the idealist view. And that's where they say that none of these events are meant to be taken literally. This is also called the allegorical view. That is saying that every generation has an antichrist. Every generation has a tribulation. Every generation has a persecution. And so whatever generation you're living in, you just have to say, look at what happens. God is ultimately in control. Jesus is ultimately the victor. And we may have to endure hardship, but God ultimately is going to set everything right. And that's a beautiful view to take, but it has its own problems we'll talk about in just a minute. But it's meant to be seen allegorical. It's just an ideal that every generation has to go through. The third view is the preterist view. And this is the belief that everything in the book of Revelation has already happened. That it was written to specific people at specific points in history, it's in a specific context, and that everything has already happened. So you don't have to worry about it. It's all already happened. It's already taken place. It has its problems as well, as we'll see in a minute. But the last view is the futurist view. And the futurist view says that is the opposite of the preterist view. The preterist view says that everything has already happened. The futurist view says that none of it's happened. It's all going to happen in the future, that none of this has happened yet, and we can start studying it to get ready for it. Well, each of these four major views has a problem with it. The problem with the historicist view that tries to shoehorn the book of Revelation into our modern context, the context of the reader, is that in multiple places, God tells John to prepare because these things are going to happen soon. Now, that makes no sense if it was going to happen 2,000 plus years later. The parallel that is made throughout the book of Revelation is to the book of Daniel. That the apocalypse of John relies very heavily on the symbolism and the imagery of the apocalyptic passages in the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, Daniel is told by God to seal up what he has been told, the apocalyptic visions Daniel has. He says, seal all these things up because they're not going to happen anytime soon. And so Daniel writes them down and he seals them up for future generations. John is told the exact opposite. John is told, do not seal this up. Share it with everyone. Tell people to get ready because they're going to happen soon. So we know the historicist view doesn't work. The problem with the idealist view is John is a specific person writing to 7 specific church communities that actually existed. If this is all meant to be allegorical, if it's all meant to be taken as saying every generation has their problems, why would John tell them to prepare for specific tribulations they were going to experience, specific trials they were going to undergo, if it was not meant to be taken as something they were actually going to go through? Yes, it's figurative language, but it's to prepare them for literal things. And so as we look at this, we have to see that it was meant to be given to specific people at a specific point in time, not to every generation throughout history. Are there things we can apply in every generation? Yes, but that's not the way it was meant to be written and interpreted and understood. The preterist view. The preterist view doesn't hold water because we haven't seen everything the book of Revelation talks about happen yet. The end of the book of Revelation, the apocalypse of St. John, tells us that God is going to get rid of the current heaven and earth, and he's going to replace them with a new heavens and a new earth. We haven't seen that happen yet. God is still restoring all things. So the preterist view doesn't work. And the futurist view doesn't work because, once again, these people were told, get ready, these things are going to happen soon. And they needed to prepare for them. If it was the futurist view, why would John even tell them about it in the first place? Why wouldn't he just seal it up and say, hold on to this, in 2,000 plus years you'll need this? So that doesn't work either. So what do we need to hold on to? I want to introduce a view called the partial preterist view. The partial preterist view is what I hold to. It's a middle ground. And it's a middle ground view that believes that most of the events have already taken place, but not all of them. Because while specific things were told to specific people that would happen at specific points in history, like I said before, we have not seen the new heaven and the new earth yet. We have not seen God restore all things to the way they were supposed to be in the beginning of creation. We're still seeing God's plan of love, redemption, and restoration unfold. So I'm going to suggest that we follow the partial preterist view. I think that's the one that makes the most sense. That most of the things happened, that the people that were written to experienced those things, but not everything has happened yet. And I'll show you what I mean by that as we go through. So, when does all of this start? When does all of this start? Well, we have to see, as we see, the promise of the book of Revelation lets the reader know that these things will happen soon. And we're going to look at a passage here in just a moment to see that this was written to specific people, and they're told it's going to start in their lifetime. Look at what it says. Look, I am coming soon. This is Jesus talking to, or God, who is Jesus, both and, talking to John, saying, blessed are those who obey the words of prophecy written in this book. And this is not the only time he says it. In the very beginning, Jesus tells John to write these things to the 7 churches for the things that are going to happen soon. So it's the promise that, some people say, oh, well, in God's world, soon can mean all kinds of things. But once again, God is giving this message to a specific person, John, to a 7 specific church communities to let them know what would happen to them soon. All right, so now we've jumped into it. Let's actually begin to look at some of the symbols we need to understand. First is this idea of the beast. All throughout the book of Revelation, there is a creature called the beast. One beast comes out of the ocean, another comes from the land. What is the beast? Well, this is a connection, as we already mentioned, to the book of Daniel. That in the book of Daniel, Daniel has a vision of 4 different beasts. And he's told what each of these beasts would be, except for the 4th one. He says the first beast he sees is the Babylonians, the second is the Medo-Persians, the third are the Greeks, but then there will be a 4th empire that would rise before the kingdom of God comes. Now we can balance this with another vision that Daniel interpreted for King Nebuchadnezzar, the vision of the statue. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, a visionary dream, so to speak, where he sees a statue made of these different materials. Eventually a rock comes that destroys that statue and it turns into a mountain that covers the whole planet. Both of those visions are connected to government, and Daniel explains to Nebuchadnezzar that each part of the statue represents a government. And these 4 beasts that Daniel has a vision of also represents 4 governments. Now we can follow the order of, we're blessed to be able to look back on the past, and we can see the order of the beasts. We saw the Babylonians rise and fall, the Persians rise and fall, the Greeks rise and fall, and who took over the known world after the Greeks? That's the Romans. That's the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire fits the image of the beasts that are depicted in the book of Daniel. Look at what Daniel says. It says, these 4 huge beasts represent 4 kingdoms that will arise from the earth. But at the end, the holy people of the Most High will be given the kingdom, and they will rule forever and ever. So we see that the visionary dream of the statue that's destroyed by the rock that becomes a mountain that covers the whole planet refers to God's kingdom that covers the whole planet. Well, what do we see happen during the Roman Empire? That beast has 2 forms. The first form is the Caesar who is known as the servant of the people, and then under Nero a second version of the Roman Empire begins to take shape, which is the worship of the Caesars, where the Caesars became deified. And Nero was the first Caesar to require, not as grand of a scale as some of the other Caesars, but Nero was the first Caesar who began to require people to worship him as a god while he was still alive. And so we can see by following the pattern that Daniel lays and that John follows, this 4th beast, the beast that's referred to in the book of Revelation is the Roman Empire. You see how that works? So we don't have to worry about some future one world government. The nation of Rome, the Empire of Rome, was the one world government. To the people at the time of John's writing, the Roman Empire covered and ruled over the entire known world. In their mind, Rome was the world. And so if the beast is Rome, what is the mark of the beast? Well, people have created all these fantastic ideals of what would happen. One of the things that happened to me a couple of years ago, I love technology. I love how technology is making life better. I'm fascinated that if you would have told me as a kid in the 80s that I would carry a television screen in my pocket and I could stream movies and videos and TV shows and watch live sports and stuff all from a screen I carried in my pocket, man, I would have laughed at you. That was the Jetsons. That was science fiction. That wasn't real. But man, it's real. And one of the things that we're starting to see now is people are starting to incorporate technology into their body, and sometimes this scares people, but I'm excited for some of this, that they have this chip that people in Sweden have been experimenting with that can hold personal information and can begin to serve as a key. As a guy that loses his keys a lot, I love the idea of being able to just get in the car and the chip power my car, of being able to wave my hand over a sensor on my computer and it unlock my computer so I don't have to keep up with 5,000 passwords. I love that. Well, I shared that article on social media, and you would be amazed at the backlash I received of people who said, "Oh, that's the mark of the beast because it said there's going to be a mark on your hand and your forehead. That's this technology." Well, these are people that don't know how to follow the rules of apocalypse. If we know that the beast is the Roman Empire, what is the mark the Roman Empire had people take? Well, the mark of the beast refers to a mark that's connected to the Roman Empire that people had to take on their hands and their forehead to buy and sell in the marketplace. Well, what do we see? Well, beginning with Nero and far into other emperors like Domitian, people had to worship a statue of the emperor. That outside of the marketplace, also called the agora, if you've ever heard of agoraphobia, agora means these large gatherings of people. The agora in the Roman Empire was the marketplace. It's where people would go to buy, sell, and trade. And if you were a farmer, you would bring your harvest to the agora and you would sell it or trade it there. If you needed groceries, you went to the agora. If you were a business person, you would sell your stuff. Almost always, you might have a store of your own, but you would take most of your stuff to the agora because that's where people hung out. It's like the mall. But here's the thing. Under Nero, beginning with Nero and well into other emperors like Domitian, the Caesars began to set up shrines to the cult of the emperor. And you would have to salute the statue of the emperor, and it wouldn't be this big massive thing. It would be a bust. It would be a shoulder-up version of the emperor's likeness. And you would sprinkle a pinch of incense over a fire. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a big thing. And you would salute the statue of the emperor, and you would say, "Caesar is Lord." That's it. And then you'd be allowed to go into the marketplace. And that's what you could just imagine a line of people waiting to get into the marketplace, saluting the statue of the emperor, saying Caesar is Lord. And as a result, they would have a mark on their hand and their forehead from the incense soot, the ashes, right? That from where they had sprinkled that incense over the fire, and it would leave a mark on their hand and their forehead. That's what they were talking about. We see this in Revelation chapter 13. It says, "He required everyone, great, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead." The right hand is the hand you salute with, because it's the hand that you hold a weapon with. And in the Roman Empire, the salute was meant to show that you're not carrying a weapon. If you were trying two enemies were going to have a peace talk, or if you were going to approach a leader like the emperor, you would salute them to let them know that you came in peace, that you were not carrying a weapon. Your right hand was your warfare hand, which you held your weapon in. And so a salute would be to touch your forehead with your hand. Sometimes it was held straight out, but it created these marks on the hand or the forehead. And he says, "And no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name." And it's the idea that you were saying Caesar is Lord. The name was Caesar. And so when we talk about this, we recognize, see how we're able to use the tools of apocalyptic literature to make sense? We're able to refer back to the book of Daniel to see that the beast is the Roman Empire. It's the beast that came after the beast that represents the Greeks, so that's the Romans. The mark of the beast is what the Roman leader, the Caesar, began to require people to do to salute his image in order to get into the marketplace. And we can now see what the number of the beast is. According to John, the beast number gives a clue as to whose mark represented the person and his name. And we're going to see that he says that it's the number of a man, of a specific person. And so as we look at this, we have to recognize something really important. John, when he writes this, is in a Roman prison. And if he's writing letters to Christians in the early church talking about what the Roman Empire is going to do and the persecution that Caesar is going to bring on them, John has to codify, he has to make this in a code that they would understand but that the Romans would not, because the Roman guards are going to read his letters before he sends them out. And so how does John code? How does he encode this message so that other people would understand it and they would not? He uses numerology, gematria. They would have understood how to do this. And he says that the earliest manuscripts list the number 616 as the number of the beast, but it quickly became changed to 666, but both are translated using Jewish gematria into either Nero Caesar or Caesar Nero. This is a reference to Caesar, that Caesar is the one who is going to make us have to take this mark. Look at what the verse in Revelation 13 says. Wisdom is needed here. John is telling his reader, you got to be a wise person to understand what we're talking about. You've got to use your mind. You've got to think this through. He says, let the one with understanding solve the meaning. So he's letting them know it's coded of the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man. A specific person, a human being. His number is 666, or like I said earlier, manuscripts say 616. John wants his readers to know that the beast comes from Daniel. That's the Roman Empire. The mark of the beast is something they need to prepare to stay away from, because Christians would not say Caesar is Lord. Christians would not take the mark. If they were devoted to Jesus and following after him, they would not say Caesar is Lord. They would say Jesus Christ is Lord. And what would that mean for them? Think of the consequences. Think of the problems that would cause for them. You wouldn't be able to buy groceries. You wouldn't be able to work in the marketplace. You wouldn't be able to sell, buy, or trade the things that you make. This would create poverty and hunger among the Christians. This is a huge part of the tribulation. Now, fun fact, and maybe you knew this, maybe you didn't, but the word tribulation is the name of a method of torture that the Romans used. To go through a tribulation was a torture device they would use, and they would lay you on the ground, they would put a piece of wood over you, and they would begin to pile rocks on top of the piece of wood, and it would literally crush you to death. And they would use this a bunch on the Christians because they wanted the Christians to say Caesar is Lord. That's all you had to do. And you could go home. If you were in jail, if you were being whipped and beaten, if you were being starved and tortured, if you were being going to be thrown to the lions, or you were going to be executed, you could be or put in the arena for fun, or executed in front of Caesar. Nero hated Christians so much that according to ancient history, that he would, while they were still alive, he would dip them in boiling tar, impale them on metal poles, and set them on fire to light the roadways as he drove by. Caesar hated Christians. And so if you did not want to go through this, all you had to do, Nero hated the Christians. If you wanted to save yourself all this pain and all this suffering, then all you had to do was say Caesar's Lord. And they would do this tribulation, this torture, and they would pile rocks on top of you until you would say Caesar's Lord, or you died. Can you imagine? That's what a tribulation is. So when he's telling them you're going through a tribulation, he's basically saying you're going to go through a torture. You're going to go through a pressing, that you're going to be pressed by the government, by the empire, to recant from your faith. Because think of how nice it would be. If you just said Caesar is Lord, you could have your job back. One of the church communities John is told to write to is the church community in Ephesus. And in Ephesus, if you know your Bible, you know that in your history, you know that most of them made their living selling silver statues that were idols and the worship of the Greek goddess Artemis, or the Greco-Roman goddess Artemis of the Ephesians. And Christians would quit doing that because they would not worship this fake god. And so what would happen? If you didn't worship Artemis, you weren't going to be part of the Silversmiths Guild. you weren't going to be allowed to have a job. You were going to have to suffer poverty. If you didn't take the mark of Caesar worship, the mark of the beast, you couldn't buy and sell in the marketplace. That meant that you were unemployed. It meant that you were starving. Could you imagine being a husband, as a husband and a father, if I put myself in the sandals of the Christians in Ephesus that were going through this tribulation? It would be incredibly tempting to want to simply say, Caesar is Lord, let me buy my family food. Caesar is Lord, let me get a job that puts food in our purses that we could buy and take care of our family. I mean, could you imagine what that meant? Or if I got arrested for my faith. I mean, think about this, that Christians in that time, women by and large didn't have jobs. In their culture of the day, women didn't work. They took care of the home. That was a full-time job. It still is today. And so women in the Jewish culture, in the early Greco-Roman culture, by and large, worked in the home. And if you didn't have a husband to support you or a family member to support you, you had two options, being a beggar or being a prostitute. And so here I am, a husband and a father. I've been arrested for my faith. I'm being tortured. My family is starving. I'm unemployed. And all I have to say is Caesar is Lord and take the mark. And I can have all that stuff. I mean, do you see how tempting it would be? And so we see this problem. So we're able to use the tools of apocalyptic literature, and we're making sense of this. So as we go through the book, what do we see first? First, we see the prologue. The opening scene of the prologue. This is where John receives his initial vision. And we see this in Revelation chapter 1. We see this apocalyptic imagery where it says, look, he comes with the clouds of heaven, and everyone will see him, even those who pierced him. And all the nations of the world will mourn for him. Yes, amen. Well, now, who were those who pierced him? Those would have been the people who executed Jesus. The soldiers who killed Jesus and had him executed. That means in order for them to see him, that means that this would have had to have happened in their lifetime. They would have had to still been alive. What did Jesus tell the religious leaders when they had him on trial? He says, and you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with great glory. Now, this idea of coming on the clouds doesn't mean that Jesus is a surfer, that he's surfing on clouds. To come on the clouds is an apocalyptic image that we see all throughout the Old Testament, that when God comes and his presence comes, it comes with fire and storm cloud. I mean, think about the presence of God coming on Mount Sinai or setting on the tabernacle. When Moses, would travel with the tabernacle with the people, that the presence of God would settle on the tabernacle or in the area the tabernacle was supposed to be set up. And that would let the Israelites know they needed to stop their wandering and rest and set up camp there for a while. That when the Holy Spirit came on the disciples in the upper room, it came as fire and wind. This coming with the clouds, it's apocalyptic imagery of judgment. And Jesus told the Sanhedrin, you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with great glory. When we see this, this is an idea of judgment. And Jesus is saying, the Son of Man that you have heard about in the book of Daniel, that's me. And you will see me come in judgment. And so they had to be alive for them to see it. And look at what John is told. Write down three things. He says, write down what you have seen, the things that are happening now, and the things that will happen. So John had to write down those three things. And so once again, we see this promise that these things are going to happen soon. So in the prologue, John is told, write down three things. What you have seen, what you will see, and what will happen after that, what's going to happen. So John is writing down the things he's already seen, the things that are happening now, and the things that will happen in the future. Then he is given letters to talk to 7 specific church communities. And these are real church communities. These people actually existed, and you can see on this map where they were. Now, every one of these church communities had a specific thing going on, but they had one thing in common. They were wrestling with being new Christians. Remember, Christianity was brand new at this point. They were still figuring all this stuff out. These were church communities that were living in Hellenistic, Greco-Roman, non-Jewish places, and they were trying to figure out, how do I live as Christians in a non-Christian world? Specifically, these people were also all major centers of trade. That if you look at one of the great things that happened during the reign of Nero and the time right before he became Caesar is that the Roman Empire began to conquer and take over the areas to the west that allowed them to have access to Europe. And so as they got into this, was a massive new trade point to cross the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea and get into this new area of Europe. And so as we were able to begin this trade route to go east and west, that they could go east into the area of or west in the area of Britain, and they began to go east, as we see with modern day Turkey today, into these new areas that they didn't have before, as the trade became with North Africa and Palestine. All of these areas of trade became open, and the Mediterranean Sea, man, connected all of this. And so these are all major centers of trade, and God gives them each a specific letter to tell them to get ready for persecution, to complement them. And for all of them except for one, he ends up giving them, with the exception of Philadelphia, he gives them all something to get better and improve on. So these are specific people in specific points in history and specific cultural contexts. Then John is told about 3 sets of 7. 3 sets of 7. Now remember, 7 is the number of fullness. And out of each one of these seals comes a judgment, something terrible that happens. Out of each 7 trumpets and 7 bowls. Now, all of these are connected to the Mosaic covenant, and most people miss this, that in the Mosaic covenant, there are 3 promises that if the people of Israel were to keep the law of Moses, the Mosaic covenant, God says, I will give you 3 things. I will give you land, the promised land. God says, I will give you unity as a people. I will keep you all together. And then he says, and I will give you the sacrificial system so you can be made fit to enter into his sacred space. That God's space is sacred. And the sacrificial system was meant to cleanse us of our sins and to change our hearts and minds to make us fit to enter into God's presence and have a relationship with him. And so the promise is, if you obey the covenant terms, God said he would give Israel those 3 things. He said, but if you don't do those things, if you read the end of the book of Deuteronomy, it tells us this. He tells them, if you fail to keep the terms of the covenant, I will take these 3 things from you. And because Israel rejected the Messiah, God said, I'm going to bring something new to replace this. And so the 7 seals is a sealed up scroll that has writing on the inside and the outside. In the Jewish context, the only scroll that they would have writing on the inside and the outside, and that was sealed up, would be a land deed. You see, people wrote on scrolls made of papyrus. Papyrus, the way it was made, was smooth on one side and rough on the other. And so people would write on the smooth side and then roll it up with the rough side facing outward to protect the writing. But a land deed, once it was agreed on, if I bought property from someone else, we would go to the local governor, the local magistrate, we would agree that I had bought the property from this other person, and they would write up a land deed. And we would have witnesses that would come, and the land deed would be written and signed, and then it would be rolled up and sealed to preserve it. And the magistrate would put their seal on it, and the seal had their authority. The only way to open that document, to protect it, the only way to open it was for another magistrate of equal authority to open it. And then the witnesses would sign the outside as well. So this scroll represents the land deed God has made with his people. What's the only land agreement God has ever made? It's with Palestine, with the promised land. That's why John gets so upset when nobody can open the scroll, because John wants to know what's going to happen to the promised land, what's going to happen to the land of Israel. That's why when John is so upset, he's told, look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, he is worthy. He can open the scroll, because only someone with equal authority to God could open the scroll. And Jesus is God, so he has equal authority. Now, what's interesting is after Jesus opens the land deed, there's not a new one made. You see, if there was ever any contestation or question about a land deed, the old one would be opened and a new one would be made. But God doesn't make a new one. He just does away with the old. And then out of the 7th seal comes 7 trumpets. In the book of Numbers, Moses is told to make 2 silver trumpets. And whenever the people of Israel would need to gather together for something, to mobilize for war, to gather together for a festival, to worship God, whatever, they would blow the trumpet. Maybe you've heard of a modern version. This is called the shofar. But these were silver trumpets that were made to gather the people together. And they symbolize the gathering of the community. Well, remember, this is the opposite. This is the undoing, because Israel has failed to keep the covenant of Moses. And so instead of gathering the people together, now these 7 trumpets talk about how the Israelites are going to be scattered. And even today, the Israelites live in something called the diaspora, that they live scattered throughout the world. And if you were to hang out with a Jewish family during the Passover Seder, at the end of the Seder, they end it with this prayer, this cry to God, next year in Jerusalem, that they long to reunite in the Holy Land and to be one people again, because they have lost their unity. And then the third one is the 7 bowls. The 7th trumpet brings 7 bowls. And bowls were used in the sacrificial system. That when people would worship God, there were different types of offerings. There could be liquid offerings where wine would be poured into a bowl. The wine would then be poured out of the bowl onto the altar, and it would evaporate, and that would go up to heaven as an offering to God. But the majority of the time, what was poured out was the blood of the animal sacrifice, that a lamb or a bull or a goat would be brought to the priest, and it would be slaughtered, and the blood, after the lamb's throat was slit, and this is a very gory, messy thing, the blood would be drained into these bowls, and the blood would be poured over the altar as a sacrifice to atone and make a right relationship with God again. And what we see is the bowls represent the sacrificial system, and that God is getting rid of all 3 of these things. In AD 70, we see all of these things happen, that Israel's land was taken by it was already owned by the Romans, but it was destroyed. The city of Jerusalem was destroyed, and the promised land would never be owned by Israel again. The unity of the Israelites was gone. They were scattered. They fled, because this is the first time, up until this point, until 70 AD, the Jews were accepted by the Romans. You see, the Roman government, the Roman culture, venerated and respected any culture older than them. And since the Jews had a culture older than the Romans, the Jews were allowed to keep their culture and their system of worship. They weren't made to worship the pagan gods of Rome. They were allowed to worship Yahweh. But once this happened, they took that away. And Israel was no longer allowed to be protected. They were no longer a protected culture. And so they ran literally for their lives, because they were being persecuted by the Romans. And then, of course, the sacrificial system was done away with when General Titus destroyed the temple. And at that point, not only was the temple destroyed, but they also destroyed the genealogies. This is why I get kind of flabbergasted, but also fascinated with people that are waiting for a 3rd temple. Some people believe that Ezekiel's temple is going to be built. And this is just not possible, because even if they do, it's possible they could build the temple, but Ezekiel's temple was not meant to be a 3rd temple. It was meant to be the temple they built when they came back from exile in Persia, but the people used the beautiful, luxurious construction materials given by the Emperor Cyrus and the Emperor Darius of Persia to the Jews as they were sent back to their land, in their territory. They used it to build their own homes. That's why Nehemiah and Ezra got so ticked off at them for living in beautiful homes and not building the temple. But they didn't have the materials, so they couldn't build Ezekiel's temple, the temple Ezekiel saw in a vision. But let's say that even if they built Ezekiel's temple, my point is, who's going to work it? Who's going to be the priest? To be a priest in the temple, you had to come from the tribe of Aaron, the priesthood of Aaron, through the tribe of Levi. And so who's going to work it? There's no genealogies to prove. Who's going to be the high priest? Who's going to be the king of Israel if they do get the kingdom back? No genealogies exist anymore. They were all destroyed. That's why the genealogy of Jesus was so important in the book of Matthew and the book of Luke, to show that he is king, that he qualifies to be king. And so the Mosaic covenant has been done away with. Consider what Hebrews chapter 8 tells us. It says, when God speaks of a new covenant, it means he has made the first one obsolete. It's gone. It's out of date. It's no longer useful. It's like me trying to go back in my drawer and pulling out my old analog Nokia brick phone. It doesn't work anymore. It's there. I can hold it in my hands. I can look. I can even charge it up and turn it on. But it doesn't work because it doesn't connect to cell service anymore. It can't do what it was supposed to do. It's out of date. It's obsolete. It's now out of date and will soon disappear. God replaced the old covenant, the Mosaic covenant, with the new covenant. That's why we separate the Bible into two different chunks. The Old Testament, a testament is like a will, a testimony. It represents the old covenant, and the New Testament represents the new covenant. Jesus brought a new covenant. Now, we've talked about this before, but you've got to understand that this had not happened yet. And I believe that because nobody talks about it, Jesus predicted the siege of Jerusalem. And after the siege of Jerusalem, all three of these things were lost. The promised land, lost. Today, even though Israel now exists as a nation, they don't own the whole promised land. Part of the promised land is in modern day Egypt, part of it's in modern day Jordan and Iraq, and part of it's in modern day Syria. That Israel, even though they're their own nation, they still don't have the whole promised land. And even though they have a nation, they're not a unified people because Jews still live all over the world. And they don't have a temple, so they'll never have those three things again. God took those away and replaced it with something better. And the siege of Jerusalem was what he used as judgment. That's what the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls all point to, how the siege of Jerusalem takes away these things. They're all talking about the same event, just 3 different aspects of it. And we see in the middle of all of this the defeat of Satan. We see in the middle of the book of Revelation that God flips the script, that Satan tried to destroy Israel and tried to destroy the great plan of redemption, that Lucifer believed that if he could destroy the Messiah and destroy Israel, he would destroy God's great plan, but he didn't. God's plan was greater than one single nation. God used one nation as the catalyst, but the goal was always to get the whole world back to him. Look at what we see in Revelation chapter 12. Then I heard a loud voice shouting across the heavens, "It has come at last, salvation and power and the kingdom of our God." That lets us know that when this point happens, which we've already seen it take place in history, God's kingdom has come. The authority of his Christ, that now we rule and reign according to the Bible. In Ephesians chapter 2, it says we are seated with Jesus in heavenly places. It says this, "For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down to the earth, the one who accuses them before God day and night." The word Satan means the adversary, means the accuser. And we see that this is what the early church believed Lucifer was, that he was the accuser of God's people. And they have defeated him not by force, but by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony. And they did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die. So we see, as a result of all of this, and we see this in Ephesians, we see this in Colossians, we see all throughout the New Testament, that God's mysterious plan was not just to have one nation be his people, but to have the whole world. And then we see the millennial reign. We see God come and his kingdom has come. Now, people, when they get to this point, man, that they want to flip the script. They want to say, okay, up until this point, everything's been figurative, but now we're going to get literal. That there's going to be a literal Armageddon. There's going to be a literal battle between this one world government and God's army. And God's going to come down from heaven with the armies of heaven, and there's going to be a great battle. No. It's all figurative language. You have to follow the rules. It's all fantastic imagery that symbolizes earthly realities. What is the millennial reign symbolizing? Well, let's look at it together. Then I saw an angel come down from heaven with the key to the bottomless pit and a heavy chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, that old serpent who is the devil, Satan, and bound him in chains for 1,000 years. Now, once again, numbers have meaning. This is not meant to be taken literally. It's figurative language. Why would the number 1,000 matter? Well, in Jewish numerology, the number 1,000 refers to a massive amount. When you multiply something by 1,000, it just means a massive undefined amount. There's another passage in Revelation where it talks about the number of Israelites that come into the kingdom, and it's 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. And it's symbolism to say not that literally only 144,000 Jews will come into the kingdom, but it's symbolism to say that it's times 1,000. 1,000 is massive. I mean, think about the passage where it says that a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day. It's just saying that it's a massive untold, unknown number that is going to, exist for a undefined period of time. This means there's an unknown, undefined period where God will reign before Satan is released. Now, look at what it says in Revelation chapter 20. The angel threw him into the bottomless pit, which he then shut and locked, so Satan could not deceive the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were finished. Afterward, he must be released for a little while. So what do we see? How do we connect this to what John and the early church would have seen? Well, Jesus tells his disciples quite clearly that the kingdom was already among them. He said that the kingdom's already there, that Jesus brought the kingdom. In the beginning, he said, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. It means that God's kingdom has come down from heaven to you. It's come close to you. But he also told them that the kingdom's already here. And so God rules and reigns here on the earth, starting from the time of his incarnation, of his coming to the earth. And so for the last 2,000 plus years, the church has been in the millennial reign. Satan has been bound. Now, I'm not saying evil has been gone, has been completely removed. There's plenty of evil in the world. But what we see is from the time Jesus won his victory on the cross, that the church has spread across the globe like a wildfire. That no matter how hard people tried, they could not put the fire of God's gospel out. It spread. Persecution actually fueled the fire and caused it to grow in intensity. When people saw how serious the Christians were, they would not repent. They would not recant from their decision to follow Jesus. They wouldn't turn away from it. They would rather die than say Caesar is Lord. Eventually, we see that the Roman Empire is defeated not by force, but by love. That within 30 years of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, the entire known world had heard the gospel. Within 300 years, Christianity would become legal, and over the quickness within the next century, after Constantine, Christianity would become the actual worldwide religion of the known world of Rome. And as the church spread, now have there been other religions and other things? Absolutely. But wherever the gospel has gone in authenticity, up until recently, we see people grabbing a hold of it. Now, like I said, this is not something we can hold hard and fast to wooden literally, but it's a symbol of the church age. And the church age is drawing to an end, and I don't know how long that's going to take. But we see in the last 100 years, it seems like evil has come back in a unknown way up until then. Things we haven't seen since the Roman Empire. And I don't want to fall into the trap that I tell people not to fall into, but it's tempting. It's incredibly tempting to believe that this incredible uptick in evil and pain and suffering, that the 1900s was the bloodiest century in recorded history. We haven't seen evil accepted and celebrated on a global scale like we have since the Roman Empire. And so I'm not saying this is exactly what's happened, but I am saying it's tempting to think that the millennial reign is starting to draw to an end. And what will happen after this? Well, if the millennial reign is coming to an end, and I'm tempted to believe it is, I'm trying not to fall into my own trap, but if I'm tempted to believe that it is, what happens next? Well, after the millennial reign, the church age comes to an end, God brings a new heaven and a new earth and a new Jerusalem. Jerusalem is meant to be the city of God, the mountain where God's people connect, where heaven and earth can connect. You have to get this, and I don't have time in this lesson to go into it, but the mountain of God, there was in Eden, according to the book of Ezekiel, it was not just a garden, it was a mountain where God's heavenly family and his earthly family connected, and that's the goal. Look at Revelation 21. John sees this. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had disappeared, and the sea was also gone. Before the flood, The flood waters were actually underneath the earth. And it's crazy that science is actually proving this, that the world used to have a lot more territory on it. The world used to look very different before the flood. And he's saying that the sea was also gone, that everything's going to go back to the way it was supposed to be before. He says, and I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. You see, God's new heaven and new earth is the mysterious plan that God has put in place since Adam and Eve broke relationship with God. That God wants everyone to come back to his family. And for that to happen, God has to get rid of the old. This heaven and earth right now is broken. It's not the way it was meant to be. God's heavenly family can't connect with his earthly family. Human beings, when they die, their spirits go to heaven with God. Paul said to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. But heaven's the backup plan. Human beings were made to rule and reign on the earth. God's heavenly family was meant to rule and reign in the heavens, and God was going to be the connecting point in Eden, in his temple. And look at what we see. Look at what God will tell the people. He says, I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them and be his people. God himself will be with them. This is the fulfillment of Old Testament apocalyptic prophecy. All through the prophets, we see this phrase. God said, I will be their God and they will be my people. That is the goal. Look at what Jeremiah said. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord, after the day of the Lord, after the judgment comes. He said, I will put my law within them and I will write on their hearts. I will be their God and they shall be my people. You see, that's the goal. The goal in the new heaven and the new earth, God is going to put all things right. So this is all fantastic imagery symbolizing the earthly reality that God wants to restore all things. But since it hasn't happened yet, we know that that part has not come to pass yet. So what do we do is we get ready to wrap up the book. And this is a longer lesson than normal, so thank you for sticking with it. But I want you to understand, as God wraps up this time, this was a specific message, an apocalypse, a revealing, an uncovering of truth, of the events that the early church was going to see. These 7 specific church communities would see. John wrote down what has happened, what he would see happen, and what is going to happen. And God is in the process, after the millennial reign comes to an end, he's going to come to set all things right again. And then the epilogue at the end, just as God had a prologue message, introductory message to John, he has a concluding message. John, at the very end, receives the counter, the opposite of the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, Daniel is told to seal up the scroll because it's not going to happen. But look at what John is told, that he said that people need to get ready for this tribulation, this persecution that's going to happen. Now, yes, the persecution was not consistent forever, like always hard. Just like a tribulation, there were times where the new rocks were put on and periods where they were given a chance to recant, and then more rocks were added. Persecution came in waves, and persecution came scattered throughout the Roman Empire on the Christians, beginning with Nero all the way up to the time of Constantine. But what we have to recognize is from the very beginning, until Constantine came and converted to Christianity, Christianity was illegal. Christianity was punishable by imprisonment and death and torture. And so while it wasn't necessarily how we take it to the extreme, it was still extreme. It was still bad. Look at what he is told. John is told, do not seal up. He said, then he instructed me, do not seal up the prophetic words in this book, for the time is near. This is the opposite of Daniel. Daniel was told the time is far off. John is told the time is near. So when we look at those things, we recognize that those things were meant to be happening, and they did happen during the time of the early church. And look at how the book closes. He who is a faithful witness to all these things says, yes, I am coming soon. And Jesus did come soon. He came in judgment, just as he said he would, on Jerusalem and then on the Roman Empire. He came on judgment of Israel for their refusal to obey the covenant of Moses and to recognize the Messiah. Then he came on judgment of Rome as the beast who tried to persecute the church. And of course, Rome was actually the one who actually, under the goading of the Jews, but the Romans were the ones who actually had Jesus killed, and the Romans were the ones who persecuted the early church. And Jesus did come like he said he would. And so what's our big truth? You may say, James, this is all humbug. This is all fiddlesticks. I don't believe any of what you just said. That's okay. We still hold on to this big truth that we may not know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future. Even if I'm wrong, if all of this is meant to unfold differently, that's okay. I'm okay with being wrong. I don't think I am. I spent a lot of time studying and looking at this, but I don't think I'm wrong. But if I am, that's okay. Jesus is still king. He's still on the throne, and no matter what happens in this world, he's going to work all things out for his glory, and one day he will redeem and restore all things, and we look forward to that. We don't know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future. Thank you for joining me for this longer lesson. I hope that it blesses you. If you have questions or if you want this presentation, you can always email me. Like I said, you can call me, text me, email me, whatever suits your fancy. You're always welcome to reach out, and I'm glad to help follow up with questions. But the goal of this was to take the fear, the unhealthy fear away. That we don't have to worry about some future one world government and some mark of the beast and all these things. It's already happened. What we do need to have a healthy fear of is that Jesus is coming back, and we only have a limited amount of time to be light in the darkness, to be the salt of the earth, to bring the great truth of God's love to a lost and dying world. May that be what this book inspires us to do, not to live in unhealthy fear, but to live with energized expectation, to live on purpose for God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. So thank you for your time. Until we chat again in our next lesson, be blessed.